Let's bring in Javier Farje. He's a political analyst specialising in Latin American affairs. He joins us now from London. Thank you for your time. So Russia has sent warships to Cuba in the past, and the two nations are long-standing allies. So is there really anything out of the ordinary about this?
No. Even the U.S., as you reported, rightly said, has said that this is not a threat for the security of the United States. This is not October 1962, when the then Soviet Union and the U.S. almost went to war because of the deployment of nuclear missiles by the Soviet Union in Cuba, and it was only averted after the Soviet Union decided to withdraw that for as long as the U.S. withdrew nuclear weapons from Turkey. This is a different matter. These maneuvers have been happening regularly. As your reporter said rightly so, Cuba has become more dependent on Russia because of the lack of economic development, which Cuba is actually suffering from because of the embargo. At the same time, we mustn't forget that Venezuela used to be the main supplier of oil for Cuba, but because of the situation in Venezuela, that stopped happening, and therefore Russia has taken that place in order to support Cuban economy. Only this week, the Cuban foreign minister, Bruno Rodriguez Padilla, was in Moscow, met his counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, and they talked about a mutual support for the development of the Cuban economy. At the same time, this is a geopolitical issue. We mustn't forget that the timing is very important because only at the end of May, as you may remember, the United States allowed Ukraine to use American weapons to fight the Russian invaders. So in this particular case, Russia is saying, look, fine, if you're going to do that, we are going to have maneuvers with Cuba. On the other hand, any attempts that the West has tried to get in order to obtain some kind of support from Latin America for Ukraine has actually failed. So in this respect, Russia is taking advantage of the situation and is getting the relationship with Cuba even closer. But the U.S. has tried to cool down this situation. This is not actually October 1962. This is not a threat for the United States. And all they want to do is to make sure that these maneuvers don't go beyond some kind of like fireworks instead of proper war game, which would be extremely dangerous, especially because of the strategic position that Cuba has in relation to the United States.
And has the United States pushed Cuba into this relationship or closer ties with Russia? I mean, why are relations still so fraught between Cuba and the US? We know that Obama opened a door with the two countries with that historic visit to Havana in 2016. The door, of course, closed under Trump. But Biden has done nothing to change and open that relationship again.
Because we have to see the internal politics of the U.S. Trump depends, any president, any candidate depends heavily on the vote of Florida, where many anti-Cuban or anti-Cuban revolution Cuban Americans live. Don't forget that some elections have been actually decided with the vote of Florida, where, as I said, these Cuban dissidents live. In this particular case, Trump won the election partly because of the support from Florida, and he adopted a very hostile attitude towards Cuba. Biden is playing the same game. They're having elections in November. He needs those votes in order to be able to beat Trump. So in that respect, we have to see internal politics in the United States. At the same time, we have to understand that even though Obama opened up the doors and then visited Cuba and opened an embassy, the embargo was never lifted because there was never enough majority in Congress, Senate, and the lower house to lift the embargo. The embargo remains even after the openness that Obama showed with Cuba. So in that respect, Cuba hasn't got a choice but to depend very much on Russia. At the same time, we must understand that Russia has been cultivating this kind of relations not only with Cuba, but also countries in the developing world, like South Africa, for example. Don't forget the maneuvers that happened in February last year in South Africa, the Indian Ocean. So this is a geopolitical game that they are playing, but there's no threat in terms of security for the United States.
Thank you for breaking that down for us. Javier Farje, political analyst specialising in Latin American affairs. Thank you.
My pleasure.